there, and welcome to another episode of Business Insights with Mr. Gerridge. I'm delighted to say that we're joined by Mr. Maguire from Doe British School, the principal, who has taken time today to speak to us about some topical areas of business management, which are contingency planning and crisis management. As the world is responding to the impact of coronavirus and COVID-19, we thought it'd be really insightful for our students to hear from somebody leading the response of an organisation to the impact of this crisis. So thank you for giving up your time. We really appreciate that. I just wanted to kick off with the first question, really asking you, was this something that could be planned for? And if so, what contingency planning was put in place and how important was that?
Well, it's an interesting question. I'm delighted to be here, by the way, Matt, and welcome to your kids and to your students. Hope you're all still well at home and so on. In terms of what happened, I mean, we have various plans for various situations, various emergency situations. You have lockdown procedures. You have emergency evacuation procedures. There's various things that can happen in time of conflict and things like that, because we've been close to conflict on a number of occasions. But I don't think anybody has really planned for a total lockdown and total shutdown of the whole world economy, to any great extent. I don't think that's possible. So in reality, the answer to your question is no. We did not have a contingency plan for a COVID-19 world outbreak of a deadly disease. We didn't have that. Neither did the government have one, and neither did many governments anywhere in the world. I mean, some were better prepared than others. You can see that, can't you? If you look at what's happened in South Korea and what's happened in Taiwan and places like that, as opposed to what's happened in the United Kingdom and America, you can see that different sized organisations have different levels of planning for eventualities. So you could argue that we should have a more detailed plan for this particular scenario. My answer to that is we will have for the next time it happens. Right? But what we did is we could anticipate from quite an early stage. It was quite easy to say things from early in January, when the first announcement was made of the outbreak in Wuhan. And you think, well, okay, and there were various organisations saying this could become pandemic, and it wasn't announced as a pandemic for some time. Define what pandemic actually is. It's an outbreak in more than number of countries worldwide, and spread not necessarily by people travelling between countries. So they didn't actually announce pandemic, and the reason why they didn't, the World Health Organization, is because they did before, when there was the SARS outbreak, and it wasn't. It wasn't as bad as so people activated various strategies. So we didn't have the warning that there was a pandemic, but we did have. You could pick things up. Things were moving, and there were pace. So we started planning for the eventuality, right? But what was interesting about this particular scene, and I know you were part of it, Matt, and certainly I was that the rate at which things were happening meant that, I was saying to people, look, you're planning for next week, you can't even plan for tomorrow. Yeah. This is the reality of it, if you think about what sorts of issues were confronting us at the time, we had 2 international school trips going out, one going out to Oman, one going out to France via Switzerland. We've been to we've recruited 39 teachers who are coming in this year. We've got lots of teachers who are leaving. So there's movement of people, and that's a significant issue. We've had to plan for resources and books and other materials and things like that. We've had to plan for them, and we order them in advance because we assume a fairly constant situation. So I could assume that next year would just be an extrapolation from this year, but that's not the case, not necessarily the case. So what we did, and we started building a plan, and we got a contingency plan, brackets COVID-19, very, very particular. What are we going to do during a crisis like this? And there's I'll just read the rationale, because I've got the procedure in front of me now. First and foremost, ensure the safety of all on-site personnel and visitors. There's nothing else. There's no other priority. The children, the staff, and anybody who comes onto this site, our first priority would be the health and safety considerations of those people. And that's what we did. So quite quickly, we got sanitation and hygiene facilities improved. We had the school cleaning process accelerated and improved, and every weekend there was a deep clean, but still people were coming in from the gates and during the day, and we had signs on the gates, restricted access. So this was an initial response to something which we weren't quite certain about the extent of how it was going to affect us. So, secondly, ensure the staff well-being outside of school. We've got a lot of teachers who are in apartments, and some people, who now are very restricted in their movements, and I'm very concerned about their health, welfare and well-being and mental health issues that affect people. People are on their own and they can't even go out for a walk. That's a serious matter. So that's a very significant element of our thinking. What we can do about it is quite limited, but seriously, it's there. It's the second on our priority. So first of all, people who come into the site. Secondly, all of our teachers who are outside. The third part of the rationale is to communicate effectively on all school responses and our actions with parents. Right? So we need to let our parents know exactly what's going on a daily basis. There's nothing worse than parents being at home and just not having communication. So we've set up a virtual learning environment very, very quickly, virtual learning environment, which is actually improving as things go along. And that requires for it to be effective, a communication, two-way communication with parents. So, and we've sent lots of emails to parents, and I've sent video clips to parents and various things that we've done. We try to make sure that our parents are aware as possible. But that's part of the contingency plan. And fourthly, to conform and respond to all authority directives in regard to the school's operational response to the virus. In other words, the Ministry of Public Health in Qatar would say, look, here's what you've got to do. And that's what we had to do. And so ultimately send the kids home close to school, right?
Yeah.
And we responded to that. And so that's largely it. But the planning becomes more sophisticated. We set out the rationale for our procedure during the crisis. But what on earth do we plan for? No one really knows what we're planning for. And initially, and let's go back, I don't know how long it's been, 3 or 4 weeks maybe, we were a firefight. And businesses do that. Businesses find themselves in extreme circumstances, force majeure, in insurance parlance. Business have to respond to extreme circumstances quite quickly. And many will have done. And many will have done to a lesser extent. Now, if you think about my business, our business, education, the best thing we could do is to try to secure the continuity of the learning for the kids. It's the best thing we could do. Because what's for certain, and I love this idea that there was a start and there will be a finish. Okay, the finish might be messy, and we don't know how long that's going to go on for in terms of, initial release of constraints and lockdown. But, there was a start. There was the first death in Wuhan, and there was an end. There was the last death in Wuhan, and something happened in between, and it's like the curve, the normal bell-shaped curve. There's an increase in cases, and then there's a diminishing number of cases, and you end up with nothing. Okay, so that applies to every single business in this country and schools as well. Let's focus on the schools. How well prepared were we? Well, how well did we react to the circumstances in comparison to other schools? So, and therefore, and I hate to translate this crisis, this tragic crisis with tragic implications, to business methodology and business language, but our competitiveness within the marketplace that we operate in, because we are a business, is contingent on how well we manage our way through this crisis. How well we manage our way through this crisis is contingent upon how well we prepared for the crisis. And as I said before, we didn't have much of a run in for that. Okay, but other schools, as I know, in other words, competitors, were not as well prepared, didn't react as well as we've reacted. And you could possibly argue that some have done better, but I'm not convinced that that's the case. So, reiterate, look after everyone on the site, look after our staff at home as best we can, make sure that we communicate effectively with parents, our customers, and make sure that we respond to the statutory, legal and regulatory conditions implemented or identified by the governing body.
Thank you for that. That's really interesting in terms of that insight there. So thank you. Just one question I wanted to ask you. You obviously alluded to the fact that maybe this was something that couldn't be planned for. As you got early warning signs about this, you started to put a contingency plan in place and you've developed that over time. Would you say that the effectiveness of the school's response, you linked to the point there around its competitive position, is based on them early actions you took and starting to put a contingency plan in place, and that has allowed the school to bounce back or continue to operate to a very good level, much more effective level?
One thing that's very interesting about this, Matt, and to the general audience here, we compete. I'll give you an example of how this thing's actually working. You're dead right. The countries that are better prepared to manage this and to deal with this are having a much better experience than those that weren't. So contingency planning and planning is critical, absolutely, for any eventuality. And the more foresight that a business organisation has, the better it will be prepared to handle circumstances like this. Right. But in terms of our competition, let me just explain this to you. There are 22 schools like DBS in this country. So there's 22 people like me.
Yeah.
And so we've got an organisation called British Schools of the Middle East. And I organised the Qatar branch of that. So it's a Middle East organisation. There's 130 odd members. Qatar's got 22 members. And I organised us as an entity. Now, this is really quite interesting because you're bringing people together who are essentially in competition with each other to see if there's anything that we can find where there's mutual benefit. So we've come together, those schools have come together, that essentially competing schools have come together because there is a mutual benefit that can be derived from organisations coming together. And that's not unusual in the business community. You know, you've got the CBI in the UK, and you've got other clusters of companies that, you know, association of engineering companies and associations of printers and things like that. So there are economies of scale that can be derived by companies coming together in clusters, even though they're essentially still in competition with each other. Okay, and that's the reality. Now, our organisation communicated effectively with the ministry. The ministry communicated with the chairmanship of that organisation. That rationalised the process, which meant that their messages could come through our chairmanship, disseminated out to the membership, and vice versa, membership through to the chairmanship and back to the ministry. So we've got a rational communication process in place there, okay? And that's just one example of planning. I mean, and we shared ideas. It was good. It is very good. We've actually produced a set of guidelines. This is interesting. A set of guidelines because we've got parents who operate under the misconception that they pay fees per term. Term 1 fees, term 2 fees, term 3 fees. They don't. They pay the annual fees in 3 instalments. So you're not buying a product of the term, etc. Term 1, term 2, term 3. And as it happens, term 3, people are saying, well, you know, kids aren't going to school, so why should we pay as much, right? And as sure as you can testify to, and I can certainly testify to, the fact is we're busier than ever. it's really difficult, and we're busier than ever, and we're doing well. We're doing as well as we can do, and we meet all the time. I've got 2 consecutive Zoom meetings after this, 10 o'clock till 12, well, 10 o'clock till 11:30, and then 12 o'clock till whatever. That's every day. So there's planning that goes on.
You mentioned earlier on in this episode, you mentioned about the importance of communication. And if a student picks up a textbook, and you'll know from when you used to, you teach economics and business, when they pick up a textbook, they see some of these key pillars and factors of effective crisis management. And one of them will be communication, transparency, remaining control. Did you see these things as really, really important in terms of the bounce back and the response of the school and its crisis management for DBS?
Absolutely. I mean, communication and transparency go hand in hand in this sense, because you've got, we've got just things in terms of teaching and learning. We've got a way of communicating with the children through Zoom and through Class Dojo and through other, online support platforms and so on. So they can communicate back to us. So I've got loads of evidence where you've got whole classes, little kids' faces on the screen, where the teacher's talking to the whole class, and they've got a facility for sending messages back to the teacher and so on, and the teachers can. So that communication is one level of communication. There are various others, there's direct communication with parents and so on, and that direct communication with parents is about transparency, because we're telling people what's going on, we're letting them see what's going on. And so that's effectively the transparency. And of course, you want to be transparent. You want to be open with people and so on. And there's various approaches to that sort of thing. About transparency. Some people are less transparent, more opaque. You can't see in. You can't get it. You can't communicate. My door is an open door, physically and metaphorically. You can always. I will never deny anybody access to me, in terms of if anyone wants to speak to me, they get to speak to me. Full stop. Okay, I might be busy for the moment, but I'll always make sure that happens, and that is effective transparency as well. We hide nothing. But you control the dissemination of information. That's critical. You don't. You hide nothing, but you can't. There's sometimes things which you really need to just make sure you manage the message. You don't hide things, but you manage the message. So there's variations on that theme.
That's a really interesting point then, in terms of just linking to control and presenting an image of calm and having control of the situation, which links into the other 2 points you've made. And I suppose the other one is around speed and obviously being effective in that in terms of the response. So it's really interesting that, because obviously they pick a textbook up and the reality of the approach taken there has been seen in practice in terms of what you're saying. So thank you for that. Just in terms of personnel and contingency planning, what's your views around that in terms of how important is it deploying the right people to actually be involved in that contingency planning and that response of the school?
Well, we're such a big organisation. The organisational structure, the hierarchical structure, if you like, has got levels within it, where there's a delegation to those levels for authority, autonomy, and control. So I can say, okay, I've got heads. If we include Walker, right, we've effectively got 4 schools.
Yeah. DBS
AK primary, DBS AK secondary, Walker primary, Walker secondary, and so on. So, and there's 4 heads there, but there's principals, overall heads. So I say to the heads of them schools, right, here's what, and we meet all the time, and when we're in normal operations, not many of your students will know this, but I'm in school at 6 o'clock, and I have my first meeting with the heads, the vice principal and the 2 heads of school here at 6:20 till 6:45, before we go out on our duties. So think about that as a watertight sort of effective means of communication, because I can then know what's going on for the day, and they can do their jobs. But we've got other people involved in the in the process of contingency planning. So we've got a head of corporate services who runs things like the administration of the school, the maintenance of the school, the cleaning of the school, catering of the school, the security of the school, and so on. So that's all delegated as well. That's another pillar. So you've got the educational pillar, you've got the corporate side of the school, and so on. So yeah, so there's effective delegation throughout the structure, where people have got specific responsibilities. Okay.
Yeah, thank you for that. Just a final one to touch on, because I don't want to take too much of your time up. Obviously, deploying resources and time and money to contingency planning in the event that potentially you could plan for something, there's obviously opportunity costs associated with doing that. In hindsight, and looking at the situation we're in now, do you think that if you was asked the question, would you say on balance that yes, contingency planning is something that should be invested in, or there's certain things that you just have to be in a position to be able to bounce back, but you necessarily can't plan for them? Or what's your views on that? You know, because obviously there is directing resources to say, yeah, we'll put plans in place for lots of different eventualities, or are we pretty pragmatic in terms of which ones we're going to actually try and plan for in moving forward? What's your views on that?
Well, right, it's a great question, because I mean, I can take it. There's all sorts of examples. I'll give you. Want to make sure I don't forget this. So, right, okay. So, for example, just as a small example about the school, a couple of years ago we used to use the pitch area as the area for evacuation, right? And then we had to replace the pitch. And we came back, and it should have been done and finished. It wasn't finished. It should have been done before we came back. It started in September. It wasn't. It didn't finish until after Christmas. So we had 3 months when we had nowhere we could evacuate to. So we had to deal with that as an emergency situation. So we found a space at the back of the school, which is now a building site. Okay. Luckily enough, the building site is a building site now. It was a piece of open land before. Now it's a building site. But the pitch is fine, the pitch is fixed. So, you know, situations that you have to deal with fast, quickly. So you can react and respond to circumstances, and you have to, you know, in this crisis management, and you know, you responded to things. But we in a way, we could have planned for that, but then again, we did have a plan. The plan was for it to be finished, and you could say, well, the possibility isn't going to be finished. So what do? So we had to plan. The plan would be, if it's not finished without the back, that would be fine. But I also work on occasions for an organisation called the Council of International Schools. Council of International Schools is an inspectorate, effectively, of all good quality international schools across the world. What they're called CIS. And one of their things in CIS, one of their questions they ask their teachers, where would you go? How would you provide continuity of education if the school burned down overnight? Right? How would you do that? Now, I haven't got an answer. I just don't know what we'd do. But funnily enough, a friend of mine who was a head teacher in the UK, in a primary school as it happens, that did happen to him. Right? I'm going back about 25 years or something like that. He woke up in the middle of the night and somebody lined up and said his school's on fire. Oh, so he went, and it burned down. It just got overnight. So what did he do? You know, so no one really has a plan for that. But those things do happen. What are you going to do in the eventuality of an earthquake? We are not far off an earthquake zone. What are you going to do? You know, there's so many different scenarios that you do your best, and I think that's an important part of this. I think, you know, there's a human side to this. You can look at the textbooks, and I'm a stickler for theory. I love theory, you know, but when it comes to the application of theory, I'm a stickler to the application of theory. You know, I'm sorry, that doesn't work. Or yes, it does work, but to a lesser extent. So you evaluate the quality. I mean, the theory is great. You know, yes, learn the theory, but know the practice. And the practice doesn't always meet the theory.
Thank you for that. Topical areas, contingency planning, crisis management, that in practice, not just looking at a textbook. It'll be interesting to see how that develops and your thoughts on that in terms of the impact, in terms of technology and education, and more broadly, business. So thank you for that. And hopefully, as we move through this process and we come out the other end, it'd be nice to touch base again and see, obviously, based on our discussion now, what it looks like in the future and where we're at in terms of the impact. So thank you for that.